Hello, I'm Jay Leeming, and thank you for listening to this podcast. If you are able to support this podcast by joining my Patreon community, please do so. That gives you access to bonus recordings, as well as to free performances of many of the great epics of the world, which I give periodically online. It also makes this podcast freely available for others. You can join that community at patreon.com/storyjl. Thanks very much. Hello, and welcome to the Crane Bag Poetry Podcast. I am Jay Leeming. Today we're going to explore a poem by the American poet Robert Frost. A poem which is in fact a set of directions to get somewhere. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin. All right, then. This poem is called Directive, and it is, it's a little longer than some of the poems we've looked at on this podcast, but it's not crazy long. I mean, it's a page and a half, you know? It's way shorter than War and Peace, I'll tell you that. Here it comes. I'm just going to read it, and then we will, climb in there and look around with our flashlights. Directive. Back out of all this now too much for us. Back in a time made simple by the loss of detail, burned, dissolved, and broken off like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. There is a house that is no more a house, upon a farm that is no more a farm, and in a town that is no more a town. The road there, if you'll let a guide direct you, who only has at heart you're getting lost, may seem as if it should have been a quarry. Great monolithic knees the former town long since gave up pretense of keeping covered. And there's a story in a book about it. Besides the wear of iron wagon wheels, the ledges show lines ruled southeast-northwest, the chisel work of an enormous glacier that braced his feet against the Arctic pole. You must not mind a certain coolness from him, still said to haunt this side of Panther Mountain. Nor need you mind the serial ordeal of being watched from 40 cellar holes, as if by eye pairs out of 40 firkins. As for the wood's excitement over you, that sends light rustle rushes to their leaves, charge that to upstart inexperience. Where were they all not 20 years ago? They think too much of having shaded out a few old pecker-fretted apple trees. Make yourself up a cheering song of how someone's road home from work this once was, who may be just ahead of you on foot or creaking with a buggy load of grain. The height of the adventure is the height of country where two village cultures faded into each other. Both of them are lost. And if you're lost enough to find yourself by now, pull in your ladder road behind you and put a sign up closed to all but me. Then make yourself at home. The only field now left's no bigger than a harness gall. First there's the children's house of make-believe, some shattered dishes underneath a pine, the playthings in the playhouse of the children. Weep for what little things could make them glad. Then for the house that is no more a house, but only a belilaced cellar hole, now slowly closing like a dent in dough. This was no playhouse, but a house in earnest. Your destination and your destinies, a brook that was the water of the house, cold as a spring as yet so near its source, too lofty and original to rage. We know the valley streams that, when aroused, will leave their tatters hung on barb and thorn. I have kept hidden in the instep arch of an old cedar at the waterside, a broken drinking goblet like the Grail, under a spell so the wrong ones can't find it, so can't get saved, as St. Mark says they mustn't. I stole the goblet from the children's playhouse. Here are your waters and your watering place. Drink and be whole again beyond confusion. All right, then. So this poem is called Directive, and it is written as a guide to getting to a certain place. It's a great idea for a poem. It makes me want to write one, and perhaps you could write one as well. A poem which guides the reader into getting to a certain place. And perhaps that presupposes that you have a good idea about where the reader might want to get to and why they might go there. And the question is the poet leading us astray? Has the poet got our best interests at heart? Is the poet interested in healing us or in just confusing us? Well, that's a good question. Back out of all this now too much for us. What does that mean? What a crazy first line, you know? Back out of all this confusion is how I hear that, right? Back out of all this now too much for us. The world is too much for us, it seems to be saying, and we're going to go beyond that to something else. Back in a time made simple. So we're going back in time in a way. This is a voyage in location, in distance, but also in time. Back out of all this now too much for us. Back in a time made simple by the loss of detail. Burned, dissolved, and broken off, like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. There is a house that is no more a house, upon a farm that is no more a farm, and in a town that is no more a town. So those lines can seem confusing, right? We're going to a house that is no more a house. We're going to a farm that is no more a farm. We're going to a town that is no more a town. We're going to a ruin, is what he's saying, basically. We're going to a place that once was. Why would we want to go there? We're going to the past, perhaps. The road there, if you'll let a guide direct you who only has at heart you're getting lost. So now the question comes, again, does this poet, this speaker, this voice of this poem, have our best interests at heart, or are they just leading us astray? Well, they want us to get lost, is what it is saying, you know. The road there, if you'll let a guide direct you, who only has at heart you're getting lost, may seem as if it should have been a quarry. Great monolithic knees the former town long since gave up pretense of keeping covered. I think of knees of stone, perhaps, right? I mean, it's a quarry after all. So I think of, big, walls of rock, pretty much. And there's a story in a book about it. Besides the wear of iron wagon wheels, the ledges show lines ruled southeast-northwest, the chisel work of an enormous glacier that braced his feet against the Arctic pole. What a wonderful image, the glacier bracing his feet against the Arctic pole as though to stretch out across the North American continent to do this work of chiseling these lines into the stone. Right? Have you seen those lines? I've seen them in Yosemite. You can see the scratch marks where the ice, went across the rock. Perhaps you live in a place where you can see that as well. It's quite incredible. Also, I'll just take a moment. This poem was written in iambic pentameter, which Frost used all the time. What does that mean, these words, iambic pentameter? Well, once again, if you're going to talk about the soup you're cooking, it's good to know what a teaspoon is and a tablespoon is. If you're going to talk about the music you're playing, well, you can just say, I like the music or I don't like the music. But you can also say, well, that was in B flat, and then it modulated to G major, So we're going to use these words, iambic pentameter. Penta, meaning five, pentagon, penta, that's five, and iambic, so an iamb is two syllables. It's an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So about, for example, the word about is iambic because we give a little more boost to the second syllable, about. We don't say about, we don't say that. These differences are subtle, but they are everywhere in the language, the English language. So when they are wrong, when they're strange, we totally notice them. When someone says, thermometer instead of thermometer, for example. So iambic pentameter means every line of this poem has 5 stressed syllables and 5 unstressed syllables. Let me find a good example. Well, the 4th line here. Like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. If we really want to pound it out, we can say, like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. Now, we don't read it like that. We don't feel it like that, but in a more subtle way we do. We don't say like graveyard, marble, sculpture in the weather. That would be weird, right? Graveyard. It's a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed, and like is before it, which is unstressed. So, da, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5. That's all you got to remember for iambic pentameter. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5. Like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. There is a house that is no more a house, upon a farm that is no more a farm. But, like I say, that's beating it on the head with a hammer, and we don't quite do that. But the pulse is there underneath the words, and it provides a music to this entire poem. So we got this glacier bracing his feet against the Arctic pole. And then the poem says, "You must not mind a certain coolness from him, still said to haunt this side of Panther Mountain. Nor need you mind the serial ordeal of being watched from 40 cellar holes as by eye pairs out of 40 firkins." Now, the pleasant and helpful folks at the Norton Anthology of Poetry, 4th edition, out of which I'm reading this, are telling us that a firkin is a small wooden tub. So we're walking through an abandoned town, and he says 40 cellar holes. I mean, that's a lot. So 40 different houses that are no more, and there are their cellar holes. Wow. Interesting. And kind of creepy is what he's saying. "As for the wood's excitement over you, that sends light rustle rushes to their leaves, charge that to upstart inexperience. Where were they all not 20 years ago? They think too much of having shaded out a few old pecker-fretted apple trees." So he's saying the forest around us is, excited by your presence here in this forest, but that's just because it's a little inexperienced and not jaded by life. And the trees are a little too happy and arrogant because they shaded out some apple trees. They were already being way bothered by a woodpecker. Pecker-fretted apple trees. Again, I don't mean to translate this poem into other language, but just to sort of expand upon it and climb in there and look around and really feel what it means, And then this speaker of this poem has more advice for us. "Make yourself up a cheering song of how someone's rode home from work this once was, who may be just ahead of you on foot or creaking with a buggy load of grain." Is this a sad poem? I mean, we're going to a ruin. We're going to a town that is no more a town. And why are we going there? Is it just sort of a ghost story to visit the past? "The height of the adventure is the height of country where two village cultures faded into each other. Both of them are lost. And if you're lost enough to find yourself by now, pull in your ladder road behind you and put a sign up, 'Closed to all but me.'" The word "closed" there is all in caps, as if it's in capital letters, as if it's written on a sign. And he's got this nice little expression, "pull in your ladder road behind you." So the road, we don't think of roads as ladders, but I think of a ladder in a treehouse, for example, and you might pull the ladder up so no one else can get in. And put a sign up, "Closed to all but me." Then make yourself at home. And that's such a clear sentence, it seems very natural, but again, consider that we're in a ruin of a town, and we're going to make yourself at home. "The only field now left's no bigger than a harness gall." Now, once again, the note here is telling me a harness gall is a sore caused by chafing against a harness. So it's a sore on a horse, right? Now, Frost lived in the country and took walks like this often and was acquainted with horses and chickens, cows, all that stuff. But nevertheless, it's sort of a interesting comparison to say that the field is no bigger than a harness gall. It strikes me as sort of, weird. I mean, I can only think a sore on the side of a horse is pretty small. Plus, it's sort of like this field is like a wound on the side of a horse. Again, this poem goes down pretty easy, but there's some darkness here, like in a lot of Frost's work. First, there's the children's house of make-believe, some shattered dishes underneath the pine, the playthings in the playhouse of the children. Weep for what little things could make them glad. Then for the house that is no more a house, but only a belilaced cellar hole, now slowly closing like a dent in dough. This was no playhouse, but a house in earnest. Your destination and your destinies, a brook that was the water of the house, cold as a spring, as yet so near its source, too lofty and original to rage. Hear the compression in those two lines. He's really boiling down his language and his words to say these things, which I feel to be true, even though I'm not sure I would have said them in that way. You know, your destination and your destinies, a brook that was the water of the house, cold as a spring, as yet so near its source, too lofty and original to rage. So unlike a river, which has tumbled for a long distance down a mountain, which might have some momentum built up, which might have some rain power, I want to say, the power of rains that have fallen into it, and might be raging, might be tumbling and filled with dead trees and mud and silt. This brook is close to its source. It's like a spring, too lofty and original to rage. Wow, interesting. Do we not rage when we are original, when we're near our source? Is this a poem concerned with returning to a source, the source? And then there's a parenthetical comment here. We know the valley streams that when aroused will leave their tatters hung on barb and thorn. I don't know if you've seen that, but I certainly have. You go through, like in the summer, you might walk beside a stream, and you'll see where the spring rains, they increase the water level of the stream, and so dead leaves and sometimes garbage, hubcaps, plastic bags, shreds of clothing, are all strung in the bushes on either side of the creek or the river, where the water level once was. Now, even though now it's dropped and it's below all this. We know the valley streams that, when aroused, will leave their tatters hung on barb and thorn. I have kept hidden in the instep arch of an old cedar at the waterside a broken drinking goblet like the Grail, under a spell, so the wrong ones can't find it, so can't get saved, as St. Mark says they mustn't. So now this journey is more and more taking on the quality of a quest, especially when he brings in the Grail, which was the goblet in Arthurian stories, which would renew, which would heal the Fisher King who was wounded so horribly, and would bring healing to, in fact, anyone, and it had magical powers, And this speaker of the poem, Mr. Robert Frost, or whoever it might be, has hidden it there in the instep arch. So that's a phrase we use for our own feet, but he's using it for a tree. I have kept hidden in the instep arch of an old cedar at the waterside a broken drinking goblet like the Grail. Notice how it's broken. Under a spell, so the wrong ones can't find it, so can't get saved, as St. Mark says they mustn't. So that is referencing the Bible. And again, our footnote here says in the Bible, Mark 16:16, here's the quote, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned." Okay, well, that's what St. Mark says. Pretty harsh judgment there. Marky. Can't get saved as St. Mark says they mustn't. So there's a harshness coming in this poem. And then we get a parenthetical line, I stole the goblet from the children's playhouse. So again, we have this trickster quality in Frost, in this voice. This voice, is it, interested in healing us or not? Does it want us to be confused or what? And where is this voice taking us? It's taking us into a ruin. It's taking us to a brook, which is cold and pure and original. And it is guiding us to a drinking goblet that is broken and that was stolen from the children's playhouse. Feel that playfulness in Frost as well. Interesting. I stole the goblet from the children's playhouse. Here are your waters and your watering place. Drink and be whole again, beyond confusion. This poem was written in 1947, So again, think perhaps of the times. World War II was over. The world was picking itself up, perhaps, or some parts of America, the Western quote-unquote world, looking around at the wreckage and perhaps seeing what was left. And that's the environment, the cultural environment this poem occurs within. Robert Frost was born in 1874 and died in 1963. He lived for most of his life in New Hampshire. And, I'm not going to try to distill his life for you, but I invite you to explore it more. I'll just say a few things that come to mind about him. There's this idea about Frost that he is just a simple man from the country. And I think that idea is unfair, both to Frost and to the world in general. It's this idea that the cities are sophisticated in the countryside. The rural places are simple and, let's just say it, dumb. That's an idea some folks have. And that's not really true in any sense, either about Frost or about people in general. But nonetheless, he cultivated that image to some extent himself, that I'm just a farmer. He wasn't quite a farmer. He had chickens. He raised money by raising the chickens, raised his kids all there, out there in New Hampshire, and had a deep connection to the land. He's got that poem which begins, "Out walking in the frozen swamp one day," which is just great and says a lot about him, It's not like, hanging out in the library, reading the paper one day, which is fine too. But, he hangs out in the frozen swamp. And the music of his poems is chronologically occurring at the same time as great sort of revolutions in poetry are happening. T.S. Eliot, William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound, Wallace Stevens. They're all his contemporaries, and Yeats as well. All busting things open in all kinds of ways. And Pound and Eliot wearing their learning kind of in a very large way. With Pound in sort of an arrogant way, Eliot not so much, I would say. But it's there. If you're going for a ride with them, you're going along with the whole history of poetry and much else in the world. And that's a beautiful ride. William Carlos Williams, not having any of that, none of that stuff. And Frost also, he's not referring to, Greek myth in his work or cultural, things, poems of the past, for example. And so with all of that happening, it's too easy to dismiss him as simple and easy and light verse, we might say. And sure, there's poems you can point to which are somewhat light, but on the whole, there's a lot of darkness in his work, menacing forces at work in his poems. He was deeply aware of the sorrows of this world and of the evil that is possible for us to do. And this is in his poems. So the journey described in this poem, playful though it is in fact deeply serious and is a journey towards healing that Frost deeply needs himself. And we can think about the modernists, as they are called, which would be the writers, who flourished in the early 20th century, particularly Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and Frost is their contemporary, And so all of them, and people alive at those times in general, not just poets, lived through some very dark times. And the question is, in terms of poetry, how did these folks deal with this? And in Eliot and Pound, Ezra Pound's cantos begin, the very beginning of this huge poem involving history and myth, all kinds of things, begins with telling again the story of Odysseus going to the underworld, where he must offer blood to ghosts, to his ancestors, to the ancestors of us all, to hear their wisdom. That's how Ezra Pound's great poem which includes history, as he famously put it, begins by seeking the wisdom of the past. And Eliot also, at least in his work, certainly is filled with allusions to poems and people, thinkers of the past. So I just can't help thinking of this when we're looking at this poem by Robert Frost, because the question is, what keeps these folks from losing it? What keeps them from cracking up under the darkness and evil they have to deal with, right? In Eliot found, it seems to me, structure in the Anglican Church and in the culture of England, and they supported him. He found support there, rather. And for Robert Frost, well, the meter of his poems is a structure which sustains him. He defined a poem famously as a momentary stay against confusion. There's that word again, the word which ends this poem, confusion. A poem is a momentary stay against confusion. And so Frost's journey here is very real. And someone like Ezra Pound or T.S. Eliot might include the Grail in their poem, but they would do so in a way entirely characteristic of themselves. It would be beautiful. It would also be sort of grand, I would think. Frost, it's entirely characteristic of him that the Grail in this poem is something that is broken and stolen from the children's playhouse. So he's a bit of a trickster. He steals it. He steals it from the kids. It's interesting, the kids who are no longer there. But still, he steals this healing goblet, in some ways, the culmination of his whole quest here in this poem. And it's stolen from the children's playhouse. Interesting. So the playfulness in Frost's work is very real, but in some sense it's deceptive. It's what's on the outside, and what's on the inside are some deep emotional needs, which are very real, and I think are felt by many of us. Here are those last lines again. Your destination and your destinies, a brook that was the water of the house, cold as a spring, as yet so near its source, too lofty and original to rage. We know the valley streams that, when aroused, will leave their tatters hung on barb and thorn. I have kept hidden in the instep arch of an old cedar at the waterside a broken drinking goblet like the Grail, under a spell so the wrong ones can't find it, so can't get saved, as St. Mark says they mustn't. I stole the goblet from the children's playhouse. Here are your waters and your watering place. Drink and be whole again, beyond confusion. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are more episodes on my website, which is jayleeming.com, jayleeming.com. If you are able to support this podcast, please do so. You can do that at patreon.com/storyjo. Thanks for listening, and take care.